Hi there folks, have you ever struggled with updating lookup or choice values in Dataverse using Power Automate? How do you find the GUIDs? How do you get the unique IDs? What about the plural table names, etc.? Well, in today's demonstration, I show you how to handle all of that dynamically so that you don't need to update your flows in the future. If you update your choices or your lookups in Dataverse, this flow will handle it all. So if you haven't already, make sure you like and subscribe, and without further ado, let's jump into the demonstration. So I'm going to kick things off from my Dataverse table. I have a new table, and within this table I have a couple of columns, one of which is a color, which is a multi-choice, and I can choose from one of red, blue and green. I then also have a lookup, which allows me to choose my favorite sport, but that relies on another table. If we have a look at our columns and we're going to go and have a look at our color into edit here, we can see we have the labels for our choices, the red, the blue and the green, but we also have the values, these lovely numbers. Now, in order for us to go and update or add choices to a record in Dataverse using Power Automate, we need to know what those choice values are, but we might often just have the labels, the strings. So I'm going to show you a rather efficient and dynamic way to convert those strings into those values. And if you were to add new choices, this flow would also deal with those new choices too. Now, as well as looking at these choices, if we're going to have a look at my favorite sport column and go into edit, we can see it's based on a related table. So not only are we looking at choices, we're going to have a look at a lookup. And if I jump across onto this other tab, I have my sports table. We can see each of those records has a GUID, again, which we'll need in order to create that relationship. And we have our friendly or text values, the cricket, the football and the rugby. So once more, I'll show you how to convert those strings of cricket, football and rugby into the GUIDs, which are needed when we update a record in Dataverse for a lookup. Now, if we jump across onto Power Automate, I'm going to put this flow into test mode, and what it should do is it should ask me what my favorite colors are, one or many, and then it will also ask me what my favorite sport is. So my favorite color I'm going to say is blue and green, and then when it comes to my favorite sport, I'll say that it's cricket, and we'll go ahead and run that, and we can have a quick look at the history. And then after we've had a look at the history, I'll show you how we can build this end to end. So what I'd like to call out now in both of the scopes, I have a compose, and if we pop that open and have a look at the raw input, you can see I have both the labels and the values in an object. And it's this JSON structure that I've created using the dynamic values from the list rows of that option set. And this is what's going to make our life so much easier when trying to convert these strings or the labels into the values or the IDs that we need in order to create these records. Similarly, if I scroll down here and have a look at the second scope, I have the lookup objects, and if I pop that open and have a look at the raw input, you can see I have the cricket, rugby and football, and this time the GUIDs. Again, I've constructed an object which allows us to dynamically get those labels converted into GUIDs by taking advantage of the fact that we can write expressions that uses the label or the string in order to retrieve the GUID. And it's also worth mentioning at this point that both of those objects are dynamic based on a list rows. So if I click on the list rows here, I'm looking up those labels and GUIDs from that specific entity. And again, if I scroll up to the top here, I have a list rows which is looking at the string maps entity, which again allows me to get those choice values back dynamically. So if at any point you're to add in a new choice value or a new record in your lookup table, those things will update automatically in your Power Automate flow by constructing a new object. So if I was to pop open the select at the end here and have a look at the raw input, we can see we have the values blue and green, which is what I selected at the beginning when I run the flow. But if I have a look at the output, you can see I have those unique values, those IDs that are needed in order to update those choice values when I create a new record. Scrolling down to the very bottom, if I have a look at the sport lookup values, again, look at the raw input, we can see I have the GUID. As the lookup only requires one value, all I'm doing is returning the GUID based on that initial string that I've selected at the start of my flow. If I finally look at add a new row and we have a look at the raw inputs, we can see we have the color, which is these two color IDs or color values separated by a comma, and then the favorite sport is based on the construction of this lovely string here, which includes the lookup table name as a plural, and then in brackets the GUID, which was retrieved dynamically based on the selection that was made at the start of the flow. Just to double check this, if I jump across onto my table, we can see the new row that was added there has the blue and green selection and my favorite sport, cricket. If I jump over into the flow once more and just quickly run another test, I'll go ahead and select all of those colors. I'll go and choose rugby as my favorite sport this time round. Hit done. The flow, as you can see, completes very quickly. If I jump across onto my table, I can do a quick refresh, and that new record is being created with the three colors, red, blue and green, and my favorite sport of rugby. So I'm going to start off the build of this flow from the classic designer, but then I'll move across onto the new designer. And for anyone that wants to see the final flow in the classic designer, then I'll do that at the very end. Now, you'll be wondering why I'm starting the classic. For the purpose of this demo, I had two inputs. I had the color and I also had the sport. And unfortunately, on the new designer, you can't currently specify a multi-select list of options, which is what I require really for this demonstration. So I'm going to have my red, green and blue as various options. And then when it comes to the sport, I'm just going to add a drop-down list of options so you can only select one. So those three sports, the cricket, rugby, and football. Now the fact I'm using a manual trigger here to do this is kind of irrelevant. It's all about passing across these labels into your solution, but this is the easiest way for me to demo it as part of this video. So in order for me to save, I do need to add another action. So I'm just going to add in a compose. We'll put in the number 1, 2, 3. I can save that, and then I'm going to flick across to the new designer and get started with building this flow. So with me safely into the new designer, we can see I have that manual trigger with those two input parameters of color and sport. And the feature I'm referencing, if you look at the options available in the drop-down, I just have a delete. But if I go into the code view, we can see I have those options that I set in the classic designer for red, green and blue, and also for cricket, rugby and football. Now, all we need to do is get started with building out this flow. So the first thing I'll do is just delete this compose because it's not needed right now. And then I'm going to add in a list rows, because what I'd like to do is get a list of all of those choices that are available for my colors. So the table that I want to go into is called string maps. So if I can start typing in string maps, there we go. And when it comes to parameters, we want to ultimately filter based on the name of our column. So if I was to run things as they are right now, we'd end up with all of the choices for your various columns that you've created. But what I'm going to do here is put in place a filter, and that filter is based on the attribute name equaling, and then in single quotes we put the name of the attribute. So in my case I have a solution CRC 93, and then the name of my column is color. If at any point you're unsure about these things, if we jump across onto the table, we can have a look at the columns, we can have a look at the color, and we can see there that the name is CRC 93 underscore color. And that's what I provided in my flow. So with that in place, we're now going to retrieve all of the choices, but we're actually going to pull back far more information than we require, which is why we'll use the next property, which is to select columns. And with this, I can put in a comma separated list of columns that I want to retrieve. I want the attribute value, and I also want the value. So that will return back both the string and the ID as part of that lookup. So at this point, I'll save and test, and we'll have a look at the history. So with the flow successfully run, if we have a look at the raw output here on the right hand side, we can see in the value array that's been returned, I have the attribute values, so these lovely numbers, and I also have the labels, or the values as they're being referred to here, the blue and the red and the green. And we now want to transform that data into an object, and you'll see me using this method in quite a few of my different videos. So if we jump back in to edit this flow, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a select action, and it's here that we're going to transform this data into an object, or at least begin to. So we'll take the value from the list rows And in the map, we're actually going to change this into text mode and then write an expression. So the aim of the expression is actually to concatenate both of those two values to construct a key value pair. So we're going to type in the expression concat and then begin to build out a key value that are encapsulated in double quotes with a semicolon between it. So first off, we have the double quote, followed by a comma, followed by the expression to get our dynamic value, which is going to be our value from the list rows. Then we're going to have another double quote, a semicolon and a double quote, and this begins the value of our key value pair. I can then put a comma at the end here and insert another expression to get our attribute value. So I can type in attribute value here. And then we want to finish that off with another comma to end our string with another double quote. So that'll give us our key value pair as a string. So next up is to turn this array of strings into a JSON object. And I do that by adding in a compose action and writing another expression. So into the expression builder here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to again use concat but also join, and we'll start from the middle and work our way out. So the first thing is to join the values or the strings from our select. So I'll go into dynamic content, I'll choose the output. I want to join each of those strings based on a comma. With them then joined, what I need to do is I need to add an opening and closing curly bracket to turn that into a JSON object. So this is where we bring in concat, and I can add in a squiggly bracket at the beginning, and if I go all the way to the end, I can add a squiggly bracket at the end like so. We still have a string at this point, so what I need to do is I need to verify or parse it by using the JSON expression, and I put an opening and closing bracket there, and we have our complete expression. So this will join the strings that are in the select with a comma. We'll then wrap that whole string in the opening and closing squiggly brackets, and then finally we'll parse or validate it using the JSON expression. If I add that, we now have our object. Now, because I've chosen to build a multi-choice, I'm using a select action here in order to replace all of the values that come back in the array from our trigger. If you just had a single choice, then you could just write an expression. So I'll go with the select, and I'll show you what you would do as well if you just had a single value. So I'll add in an action. It's going to be our select again. And the input to the select is going to be the dynamic value for our color, which happens to be an array because we're dealing with a multi-choice. And then what I'm using in the map is another text expression. And what I'm relying on here is the fact that I can call the values from our compose, which is an object based on the string. So the red, the blue, the green. So if I go and insert the dynamic content for the output of the compose above, if I was to put in the question mark and the square brackets and the single quotes and put red, that would return the red value. It would give me that number that we're looking for. But because we're doing this dynamically and we're using a select, if I put in the expression item with the open close brackets, this will loop through the one or many colors that have been chosen, and it will insert those strings into this expression, and it will retrieve those ID numbers dynamically from the compose. So if you were just dealing with one choice, you would construct the expression outputs of compose, and then in here in the square brackets, rather than inserting item, you would insert your string, and that would be inserted using the dynamic expression that you have for whatever value, and that would then allow you to retrieve that ID. So I'll click on add, and I think at this point it's worth saving and testing to see what the output looks like. So the flow in test mode, if I go and choose a couple of colors, we'll choose red and blue. I'll have to choose a sport just in order to run the flow. We've not built that bit yet. So with the flow run successfully, if we pop open the select, we can see the raw input, which includes those attribute values and the values. If we look at the output, remember we used the concat to bring together both the values, so the red, the green, and the blue, with their numbers, which are also called values, getting very confusing here. If we look at the compose, because we've then used that JSON and again concat and join, we now have an object, which is the magic trick that's going to make your life a hell of a lot easier. And if I move into that select, what we can see is the input, the red and the blue, and the output are those two numbers because we've been able to retrieve the values for red and blue by using this object that we created in the action above. So when it comes to the lookup, it's pretty much the same idea. We need to go and add in another list rows. And of course, we want that lookup to be based on our lookup table, in which case mine is called a sports table for ease of finding it. And again, I want to have a look at some of these advanced properties. Only one this time, but I want to just keep that data nice and simple. I'm going to reduce the amount by selecting specific columns, which are the ID and the value. Now, I know what these values are for me. They are CRC93 and then a sports table ID and also CRC93 sport. If you're wondering where I got these from, if we jump across onto our sports table, we have a look at these columns. I'm trying to get the sports table ID, so CRC, a sports table ID. It's the unique identifier, as in that GUID. And then I also want the name of the sport, which is our primary name column in this case, which is CRC93 sport. So with those two in place, I've greatly simplified the data that's coming back from the list rows. And very much like before, if I go and add in an action, I want to add in a select, and we'll do exactly the same as we did before. We will add in the value from our list rows 1 this time, put it into text mode, jump into our expression builder and build out that concat expression. So again, we'll start with the opening quotes. We then need to construct an expression, and this is going to be based on the name of the sport. So in this case, the CRC93 underscore sport. This is why it's quite useful for you to be able to look up those values or the names of those columns within your table. And then we can put a comma, our single quotes again, our double quotes, our semicolon, or our colon, sorry, and double quotes, and then another comma, which allows us to put on our second dynamic value, which in this case is my CRC93 a sports table ID, finishing it off with another comma, single quotes, and another double quote. So that'll create our string. We can add that in there. And now we need to, of course, turn it into an object. And we'll do that by using a compose. So for the compose into the expression editor, we are going to do exactly the same as before. We're going to do a join. That join is going to be based on the output of our select. We're joining on a comma, and then we're going to concat on the start and on the end, those squiggly brackets, which we can put in there. Again, I'll go to the end, put in a comma and put in our squiggly brackets. And finally, just to make sure it's valid JSON, we wrap it in the expression JSON with a closing bracket at the end there and hit add. So in order to get the GUID for this particular lookup value, again, I'm going to add in an expression, this time a compose. And in that compose, I'm going to write an expression similar to the one I demonstrated in the select. Remember, there's only one value here. I'm going to go to the dynamic content, I'm going to choose that compose, and then a question mark, square brackets. If I was to put the word cricket in there, it would of course retrieve the cricket GUID, but because that is dynamic, we can go into our dynamic content here and choose the value for our sport, which we have here. So by supplying that sport dynamic value into this expression, we'll look in the object that we've created here in this compose, and then we'll retrieve back the GUID. And we can add that, and we're all set up now to go ahead and create a new record with both that lookup and the multiple choices. But before we do that, let's save and test. So I'll go ahead and pick a couple of colors, but more importantly, I'll pick football as my favorite sport. We'll run that flow. We've used that select action to turn the input from the list rows into output, like so, with the name of the sport and the GUID as a string. In the compose, we then convert that into an object, so it's now ready to dynamically select those values based on the name of the sport, the cricket, rugby and football. And if we have a look at the football GUID, it's 760. If we have a look at the compose, because I chose football, we can see the output here begins with 760. So we've managed to dynamically get back that GUID based on the selection that I made at the start of the flow. Now if I was to go back into my sports table and add in horse riding and let that save, we can see we've got a completely different GUID, but because this flow is now dynamic, if I go and jump to the bottom here and add in a compose, I can go and type in an expression that will get the GUID for horse. And the way I do that is I would use the output of my compose one. I'm really regretting having not renamed these now, but if I put horse riding in the middle here and add that in, we should get back the GUID for horse riding in the output. And with that flow now run, if I pop open that compose 3, we can see we have that GUID beginning with 380 based on horse. And if we look at that compose 1 here in the raw input, we can see we now have horse riding. So that object is completely dynamic. You never have to come back and update that flow again. It will retrieve all those GUIDs and all of those choice values dynamically. So when it comes to writing those values, let's go and create a brand new record, see how we write both a choice and a lookup to a new record. To add a row, we'll choose our table, which is my new table. I need to put in a name, so this is Damien's test. And then if we look at the parameters, I want to update the color, but I also want to update the favorite sport. Now when it comes to color, I could of course make a selection here. It is based on the values, but you'll find that if you type in the word blue or supply the string blue dynamically, you'll get an error message. So what I need to do here is change this to a custom value, and I'll use an expression. Now because I have multi-choice, I need to join together those IDs using a comma. And so with join, I can choose the dynamic output from our first select action. So here we have the output, and then if I insert a comma in single quotes, that will join the one or many of the matches that we get back based on a comma, and we can hit add. The favorite sport is slightly different in that we need to reference both the lookup table and the GUID, and this is what caught me out when I was trying to build this. So this is based on the sports table plural name. Now if I go back to my tables and have a look for my sports table, we can see I've got CRC as sports table, and you can actually go and grab that via tools here and copy the logical name. So if I jump back into my flow, I can paste that in. I've got my CRC a sports table. It should be plural, so I need to put an S on the end there, and then in the brackets all I need to do is insert the GUID. And the GUID is based on this compose here. So if I go into my dynamic content, it's compose 2, there it is. That is the GUID, and that is all there is to it. So if I save this and test it, we can go and make a selection of both colors and our favorite sport, and we'll find we have a new record created based on the dynamic content that we've retrieved in our flow. So I'll choose a favorite color of red and green this time. And when it comes to the sport, let's go for cricket. So red, green and cricket will run this flow. Everything is completed as expected. If we have a look at the raw input, you can see I have those colors separated by a comma. You can also see that I have my favorite sport with the GUID for that sport there. It's making it difficult for me to highlight, but there you go, the GUID. And if we go and jump across onto our table, we can see that brand new record that's been created, Damien test. We have red and green selected and cricket. So if we have a look at the flow that I've now tidied up a little bit, done some naming. So my select for the option set value has been renamed here, and I've also given these some names so there's some more meaning behind them. But the process is ultimately the same. We're taking the data from the different tables. We are transforming that data into an object by using select, which converts those values into a string, then converts them into an object by concatenating, and then we can call those values dynamically, either by using just a simple expression to get that value based on a dynamic value, or by using a select, which will get multiple values, and then we can join those values when we come to adding that new record in the add a row action. Now for those that still like or want to see the flow in Classic, I did promise I would show you it at the very end. So here we are. Here's the Classic flow. We have the manual trigger with our color and our sport as the options. I have my first scope, which has the list rows. If we have a look at some of those properties here, I've selected columns based on the attribute value and value. I have the filter row, which is based on the attribute name equaling the name of the column that we're looking to get those choice values for. In the select, I have the body value from the action above, the concat, which we can see here, hence why we need this new expression editor, the compose, which is based on that join, the concatenation and JSON, and then our final select, which is based on the color, which is our input from our trigger, and then the output, which is based on each of those colors that have been selected. The second scope, very similar again, list rows based on the sports table, which is our lookup table. Again, I'm selecting specific columns just to simplify things, but it helps to understand when you build out the expressions in the next part of the solution. In that select, we again use the value, but it's in the concat that we're relying on these column names. So you can see I have the CRC sport there. And if I nudge along on this expression, we also have the A sports table ID. So it's worth understanding your data so that you can build out these expressions. These will match. In the lookup, again, same as before, the JSON with the concat and the join. And then because this is only one value, it's just a lookup, we're using the expression, the outputs of our lookup object here, and then in the square brackets, the dynamic value, in this case, from our trigger body. The add a new row, you can see I have, in this case, put a random number at the end of the record that I'm creating for that required field. The color is based on a join, so we're joining those IDs with a comma, and then the favorite sport is based on that table plural name and the output of this compose above, which is our GUID. So for the benefit of doubt, I'm going to go and add in horse riding at the top here, because of course I added that into our table. And let's go and also add in another color as well. We can do that from our columns. We can go into our color, into edit, and add in a new choice, which I'll call pink. And we can put in a random value as well here, just for the fun of it. So 1, 2, 3. I'll hit save. Now, of course, I need to add pink in as an option. The same would apply to however you're capturing those strings, but I do not need to change the flow anywhere else. We can put that into test. I can choose my colors, which I'll go for pink and blue. My favorite sport, I'll say, is horse riding. And if we run that, we can see that hopefully the flow will run as expected. It has added a new row. If we have a look at that option set and have a look at this compose, we can see that pink is now part with that new ID that I set. And also if I have a look at the lookup for those new objects, horse riding of course is through from earlier. But more importantly, if I jump across onto this table, we can see that I have that selection for blue and pink and horse riding. So the only thing to note is when I made this change to add in the new color, I need to hit publish for that new choice to become available in the string maps table. And that's it. That is the end of my demonstration. So I hope you've learnt lots there. Again, I like to use select, etc. But I myself was struggling with lookup and choice and could see, hopefully, how things could be simplified. So if this has helped you, please make sure you let me know in the comments. If you haven't already, make sure you like and subscribe, and I hope to see you again sometime soon. Thanks for watching.